probably heard the term USB used a lot, and you may not know what USB stands for. It stands for Universal Serial Bus. And there are a lot of benefits to this type of technology. One such is that we have the ability for hot swappable devices using USBs, and we can have as many as 127 devices on a single port of daisy-chained devices. Now, as you're looking over your material, make sure you realize that we have many different types of USB cables and connectors, and go over those. And you can see some of those here. We have the A male to B male cable. We have the mini B to A male cable, and you've probably seen a lot of these used in many different devices. You know, we have the A male to micro B. So, like I said, you've probably used a lot of these. Just make sure you take a look at all of these. The USB A male to a B male. And you need to know these because you never know what you might need for replacing a cable or what you're going to go into. And I find it helpful to keep a lot of these on hand if you're going to a customer site, so in case as you're troubleshooting you find out it's a bad cable. Really simple solution to swap out a cable. Go over your pins, descriptions, make sure you know how many pins are used for each. Just look over a lot of this information because it's all very helpful and can help you identify a device right away. This information also touch like what type of things might use this type of cable or this connector. Now the book does not go into the newest type, which is a Type-C USB. This provides bidirectional communication. It is the newest technology. You want to make sure you research this, know a lot about Type-C, because Type-C is replacing our current connections for a lot of devices. As I said, USB 2.0 is pretty much a standard, but it has become aging, and over the last couple of years we have seen newer devices going to USB 3.0. The big difference is knowing those standards, such as with the USB 2.0 we got a 480 megabits per second, so that was really great compared to the 1.0s. But now, like with newer 3.0s, we can get up to 5 gigabits per second, and with USB Type-C we're seeing speeds of up to 10 gigabits per second. So you can see how upgrading to newer devices and making sure you're using newer devices can definitely help you in the long run for your speed and transmission rates. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you're going to, if you're building your own computer or replacing the USB aspects of your computer, whatever the case may be. If you're giving some thought as to what your application is going to be, if you're buying computers for a business, think about those type of little things, like trying to go to USB Type-C, because we're only as fast as our slowest component, and we don't want our USB ports to be our slowest components. A lot of people, if you're not placing group policies on USB flash drives, some people, that legacy type technology with a 1.0 USB port is really going to frustrate your users. So make sure to know all the differences and what these type cables and connectors are used for. We'll take a brief moment to talk about FireWire, and the reason we're just going to take a brief moment about this is because you may see some questions about it, but it's hardly used in new devices. Now, FireWire connections are IEEE 1394, if you recall that from other chapters, uses a serial transmission, and the devices are also hot swappable, just like with USB. Good to know the standards with FireWire, and that FireWire 800 allows up to 63 devices, and FireWire 400 allows up to 16 devices to be daisy chained together. FireWire 400 supports two connector types, A and B. We usually just call this Type 1 and Type 2, so don't get those confused, where Type 1 connectors are typically located on different computers, and you might see an old hub, and different peripheral devices will generally use Type 2, and you might have seen some of these previously used. And make sure you look at how those pins are located to be able to identify those. Now, FireWire 800 uses a 9-pin rectangular connector, and you can see that here in this image. So that's just a little bit about FireWire devices. Remember, they're pretty much not used on new devices. Another type of technology that we won't really spend much time on is infrared connections, and these are most common use of infrared connections that you see today are remote controls. The reason for this is It's an outdated wireless technology, and we've pretty much replaced it solely by using Bluetooth technology. A big part of the rest of the chapter is over installing input-output peripheral devices. Just follow these general procedures when installing any type of peripheral device. Always read your manufacturer's directions prior to doing the install. Make sure the drivers are written for your proper OS. Make sure you have 32, which drivers you need. If you need 32-bit or 64-bit. Make sure that the motherboard port you're using is enabled, or else you will not see your device. You may need to go into BIOS and enable that. Install any devices or any device drivers, or simply plug in the device and let Windows try to see if it has a driver already for your device. Typically, when you're plugging in a USB thumb drive, flash drive, whatever you want to call them, you'll hardly ever see an issue where the driver isn't already there to enable and allow for that USB device to be used. Sometimes you might see some issues with like printers. That's one of the big ones for installing that peripheral device. You'll see that it doesn't have the most current driver for that. You need to update that. And lastly, install the application software to use the device. Such as with a printer, you may need application software to remind you of your ink if it's getting low, and sometimes depending on the product you're using, it will automatically, or have the ability to automatically, order your new ink or toner for your printer. So sometimes there's some application software to use this. If you're using a thermal printer, for example, to print out labels, sometimes you'll have software that is needed to be able to create your labels, modify those, and then be able to set up how to print those. For the most part, just pay attention to what the chapter has to say about installing the devices, such as digital cameras and recorders, maybe cams, even the digital tablets if you're going to be doing some writing with a stylus or drawing, if you have the ability to do that. A lot of times it's plug and play. You plug it in, the drivers are automatically installed, and you're up and running. But sometimes you will need to go and install other software or update drivers. Next thing we'll look at in the chapter are the monitor technologies. And you've probably come across some. You probably remember the old big CRT or cathode-ray tube monitors. These are really becoming obsolete because they're just so bulky, their resolution isn't as great, and there's just a need to move to your LCD and LED monitors. LCD stands for liquid crystal display, and LED is light emitting diode. You'll see lots of information about which is better, but that's going to be your personal preference. Another one that you'll come across is plasma. The plasma provides a high contrast with a better color, essentially, than LCD monitors, but they can be a little bit more robust and expensive. You also have the LCD and LED are a little bit cheaper, the LED being a little bit more expensive than the LCD, but just kind of, look at how those work, but the LCD and LEDs being a lot flatter than your CRTs and even some of your plasmas. They manipulate each pixel via electrodes inside your monitor, and then that image is formed by scanning both the columns and the rows to be able to form that image and transmit that to you on your screen. So the technologies are great. If you have an old CRT, it's time to get rid of that 40-pound plus beast and move to LCD, LED, or plasma technology. Another type of monitor technology that you might come across is that of a projector. And a projector just it's used to shine a light that projects a transparent image onto a large screen. We're seeing these being used more and more now, not only in the business conference rooms, but also in the home environments too, where people are having a projector instead of a television. So you may have to, look at fixing these as well, and be able to identify which type of projector you need to replace, either in a business environment or at a customer's location. So make sure you do some research into those as well beyond this class. So when you start looking into monitors and monitor technology, there are many features that you need to be aware of, such as screen size, and how that's measured is the length of the screen in inches from a diagonal point from one corner to the other. That's how you measure a screen size. You have refresh rates. Those are very important. If you want to, if your client is going to be, let's say they're going to have sports scores or news flashes being shown on their monitors, then you don't want one with a low refresh rate, or it'll be hard to read that information, because the faster the refresh rate is, the better quality you're going to get on your screen. Resolution, we know about resolution. We've already talked about this before. The resolution is just the number of spots or pixels on a screen that can be addressed by the software. So the higher the resolution, the crisper it's going to be. Some people don't really like that because they need to see larger, so you have to sometimes lower the resolution on a computer for their viewing needs. We have contrast ratio, angle, the type of connectors. We've mentioned these before, such as a VGA, is a DVI, I or D, HDMI, DisplayPort, and various others. So make sure that you take a good look at the important features of monitors.